Leviticus chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. Now when anyone presents a grain offering as an offering to the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil on it and put frankincense on it. He shall bring it to Aaron's sons, the priest, and shall take his handful of flour from it, and its oil with it, all of its frankincense, and the priest shall offer it up in smoke as a memorial portion on the altar, an offering by fire of a soothing aroma to God. The remainder of the grain offering belongs to Aaron and his sons, a thing most holy, of the offering of the Lord by fire. Now when you bring an offering of grain, offering baked in an oven, it shall be unleavened cakes of fine flour mixed with oil, or unleavened wafers spread with oil. If your offering is a grain offering made on the griddle, it shall be of fine flour, unleavened, mixed with oil. You shall break it into bits and pour oil on it. It is a grain offering. Now if your offering is a grain offering made in a pan, it shall be made of fine flour with oil. When you bring the grain offering which is made of these things of the Lord, it shall be presented to the priest, and he shall bring it to the altar. And the priest shall take up from the grain offering its memorial portion, and shall offer it up in smoke on the altar as an offering of fire, as of a soothing aroma to the Lord. Let's stop there. There's a point to reading that most exciting portion of the biblical text. Most people will get into that reading and go, oh, man, that was boring. That was hard to read through, too. Try to stand up and read that out loud sometime. It's a little more difficult. And the book of Leviticus is boring. I don't want to stand here and tell you that it's so exciting and fascinating that you're just going to be enthralled in your annual reading when you get to the book of Leviticus. I know what you're going to do. You're going to do what the rest of us do. You're going to be like this, I got to chew through this cotton. It's tough. But that's not the point. Little side point. Christianity is not about entertainment and recreation. Christianity is about spiritual development. Spiritual development is a straight and narrow path. It is a taking up your cross and following Jesus. So when you run into these tough places and you say, oh man, this is hard, this is boring, don't feel guilty. You are correct. But then find your inner maturity and say, but this is the path I've chosen. So let's go to Romans 15:4 just for a moment. For what everything was written in earlier times was written for our instruction, so that through the perseverance and encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope. That passage we just read and more of Leviticus was written for our instruction. Now, I'm not about to advocate that we go back and duplicate literally those sacrifices. We'll go a different direction. But it was written with us in mind also, not just the ancient Jews. 2 Timothy 3:16. All Scripture, can I put in parentheses there, Leviticus 2 also, is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness. It's all training. Training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, adequate, equipped for every good work. Unfortunately now, when Paul told us these things, he didn't write a commentary on the book of Leviticus. I think that would have been so neat. If you're familiar with what's in a preacher's library, and most of us old school guys will have a set of pulpit commentaries. I wish I had one that said Apostle Paul commentaries and could pull out the one on Leviticus, and he explained to me exactly what he had in mind when he says Leviticus 2 was written for our instruction. Unfortunately, Paul did not do that, so what he has done is he's kind of given us I'm going to call it a vote of confidence. He's kind of really looked in the head at us and said, you guys are going to be smart enough to figure this out for yourself. As long as you'll stay within some biblical parameters, you'll get the spiritual message that's layered into Leviticus 2. You're just going to have to connect the dots for yourself, but you can do it. You've got that ability. And I believe we can do it. I do believe we have the ability. And the only thing I'd say, as already stated, stay within biblical boundaries. You'll be fine. I don't think you'll go wrong with that. So Leviticus chapter 2, and it goes on down to 14, 16, whatever the length was. Our challenge is to see deeper. Our tendency is to want to look at the historical aspect, which is fine, nothing wrong with the historical study. But just understanding what they did and how they did it historically is not really going to make a lot of application to where we are today in our modern time. So we're looking for that spiritual application. That part when God wrote it, he had a branch that said, okay, this is to ancient Israel, this is for them. But he also had a line of thought and said, this is for my Christians some thousand years in the future. And that's the line that we want to try to connect with. So how can we as Christians find instruction here? I have some options. Of course, I got to prepare, right? And so I'm not going to tell you these are the only options. I'm going to tell you they're safe. I'm definitely going to stay within biblical parameters. But if you have some other thoughts, and when you look at parts of this passage, you go, well, what came to my mind was, you may be just as, I don't think it's an either or. My idea has to be right, yours has to be wrong, or vice versa. They can both be right. We can have two or three ideas that are right. I just don't have a problem with that. So let's go to flour. Flour is the focus of that passage on the grain offering, and it was just a daily element. Everybody had flour. Every home had flour. Only the most poverty-ridden home would not have had flour in it. And I think this is an awesome point to make. God isn't demanding that we go out and find something really exotic and wild and rare and bring it as an offering. He is content and very happy with just the common element of flour that was found in the home. And I think, okay, let's settle on that one for a moment. He's pleased with the daily mundane things. Now, come on, how much more mundane can you get than flour? Now, I know some people that are good cooks, and they get particular about what brand of flour they use for what project they've got, but flour is still pretty mundane stuff. Flour is flour. That's pretty much the way that works. And yet God is pleased with that most mundane thing. So I know I've been working this verse for a while, and that should not say 23, that should say 3. If you do have Colossians 23, I want to read your version. He says, whatever you do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. Now, if flour, just daily every common flour, could be brought in worship to God, then when I come over here to Colossians 3:24 and he says, whatever you do, I'm like, okay, whatever you do it as for the Lord. I don't care how mundane it looks. I don't care how trivial it looks. It can look as common as flour. That's okay, because if you can make the connection, you could have the regular flour that was just flour, or you could take that same flour and you could bring it to the Lord and it became a point of offering communion, connection with God. And this is the same thing we can do with the daily flour, note the air quotes, the daily flour of our life, just the mundane, repetitive, everyday things that we have to do can be offered up to God when the heart is right and the heart is mindful of God. And what this does is opens up unlimited opportunities. Your time to commune with God doesn't have to be just here at the building at 9 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock or whatever time you have in mind. When you understand that whatever you do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than men, then everything opens up. I wish I had different words to explain that, to articulate a little more, because your whole life becomes a soothing aroma to God when approached in the right attitude. And that's really what a lot of it just boils down to is what is your attitude in it. So then it was going to be seasoned with salt. That was Leviticus 2:13. And salt commonly represents some purity and preservation. We do also have the idea of a flavoring there that comes with it. And as Christians, we are to be salt. That's a pretty easy one to connect. Matthew 5:13. You're the salt of the earth. But the salt's become tasteless. How should it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. Colossians 4:6, which I don't have up here, but he says, let your speech be seasoned with salt. And so when we take the commonalities of life, the flour of life, we season it with the salt of our goodness, our kindness. We'll talk about the fruits of the Spirit in a minute. So we're salt. We're salt in our communities. We're salt in our home. We're salt in the workplace. We're salt wherever we go. Never forget that. Everything you do when you're out and about, I know some of you will be going out to eat today after services are over, and you're going to have to deal with a waitress, and she may be really great. She may be brand new. He may be struggling at whatever he does. And your interaction with him is going to be the flour that you offer to God. And it's going to be seasoned with salt. And that's going to become an offering. Now, it's just really simple in my mind. Now, all we've done is transition from flour and salt to the golden rule. Whatever you want men to do to you, you do also unto them. That is the flour that you're offering up to God seasoned with salt. Or Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father. Again, that's really all we're talking about when we say whatever you do it for the Lord. And in that, we're practicing the golden rule. We're letting our light shine because we've brought the salt of Christianity into everything we do, and we're just weaving it everywhere we go. Then we have the mention of leaven and honey, and they did not want the leaven and honey in the burnt offering. No grain offering which you bring to the Lord shall be made with leaven, for you shall not offer up in smoke any leaven or any honey as an offering by fire to the Lord. As an offering of first fruits you shall bring them to the Lord. So they could bring the leaven and the honey under the other category, offering of first fruits. And we're not going to go off and talk about those. But they could not bring it in what they were going to offer up in smoke to the Lord. They shall not ascend for a soothing aroma to the altar. Now, as you look at that, you go, wow, what do you do with that one, preacher? Okay, the ancient thing's pretty easy to get. Look, one of the things we do with it is why God didn't want it in a smoked, burnt fashion. I'm not sure. Not 100% sure. I make a guess, but I don't know. But we come to him on his terms. That's it. Somebody says they want XYZ. He's the authority. We get it. That's the way it works. I tell the person behind the counter when I'm ordering a burger, I don't want bacon on that burger. I just want mustard, onion, and pickle and a slice of cheese. And they look at me like, no tomato? I said, mustard, onion, pickle, and a slice of cheese. Oh, well, what about lettuce? I said, mustard, onion, pickle, and a slice of tomato. Do they have to understand why I like that? No, they don't. Do they have to agree with that? No, they don't. Who's the boss in that situation? I am. One of the rare times I get to be the boss, but I'm the boss in that situation. I get to order my burger like I want it, and if they're wise and will stay in business, they're going to bring me the burger I want. Okay, God's got some things that I don't always understand. Okay, I don't have to understand it. Does God know why he doesn't want leaven and honey in the burnt offering? Okay, he knows why? Then I'm going to respect his decision. There's a point of surrender that has to come that excels logic. It's still, okay. When he says, thou shalt not kill, that makes a whole lot of sense to me because as a volunteer in the prison system, I've met a lot of folks that have done exactly what they weren't supposed to do, and I see the life they're living, and it's a really, really, really ugly life. And those poor souls down on death row are in a little cell that's like 7 by 10 feet, and they stay in there 23 hours a day and never come out. It is the most miserable living I can think of. And so when he says, thou shalt not kill, I'm thinking, that's really smart. That'll get you in trouble. And if you kill the wrong person, somebody may come and kill you. So that's real logical to me. But now he makes some things, and I'm like, I don't quite get that. I don't have to get it. It's not my place to understand it. Faith really steps out when faith acts on the instructions God gave. I don't want honey and leaven in the burnt offering. And faith says, yes, it's your call. I trust you. You know what you're doing. I'm going to follow your instruction. That's really more of a test of faith than something that just makes good logical sense. So that's one of the things I would do with the prohibition against leaven and honey in the burnt offering. And then leaven is sometimes a symbol of things that are just undesirable. This carries on over to the New Testament. So it may be that somehow in this offering, leaven was just like, no, that's inappropriate there in God's eyes, I'll have to say. So let's jump over to 1 Corinthians 5, verse 6 and 8. He says, your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough? You see, here now, leaven's a negative thing. Clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new lump, just as you are in fact unleavened. For Christ is our Passover, also has been sacrificed. Therefore, let us celebrate the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice or wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. And so in Christianity, leaven has a negative connotation, and being unleavened bread has a positive connotation. And back on that burnt offering, what we actually had was a foreshadow of the unleavened nature of Christianity to come. Now, granted, that's just a very small foreshadow, but the grain offerings of our life, which our life is, and we'll work on that in a moment, is not to be mixed with the leaven of the world. It is to be a leaven-free grain offering, because our lives are that flour that we bring. It's not just the thing I did over there. Yes, it is the thing I did over there, but I did that thing because of who I am, what I have become in Christ. And it's really more about one's identity in God other than the thing that was done. The thing that was done was an outflow of what's in the heart, which Christ would teach in Mark 7:21, where he said, out of the heart. And in that passage, he lists some sins. But also out of the heart comes those good things too. And so it's not an action separate from me, but the action is really the demonstration of who I really am. And so our lives, we don't mix them with the leaven of the world. We stay clean from the leaven of the world. Then we have the foreshadowing of Christ in the flour, which is, I think, pretty common. He is the bread of life. That's just what he said in John 6:35. That's just the direct quote there. So when we go to Ephesians 5:1 and 2, Paul would say to us, be imitators of God as blessed children and walk in love, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up. I wish I'd highlighted that. An offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. Now, Leviticus text said a soothing aroma. But what Christ did was he gave himself up as a fragrant aroma. There is that fine offering of the bread, and bread is made of, somebody say, flour. And what was in Leviticus 2? Flour. So Jesus offered himself, and we come along as imitators, and we offer ourselves too. And I know that Romans 12:1 and 2, I mention it a lot, and you get into a little bind here. If I mention it all the time, there's the chance that it will become, heavy? You won't hear it anymore. But if I mention it all the time, there's a chance that one day you'll go, oh, I get it now. And I don't know which way to go on that, to mention it rarely or to really hit on it a lot, hoping one of these days to go, oh, I get it. So we present our bodies a living sacrifice, which Romans 12:1 says, it's our reasonable service. And then he says we're going to be transformed and renewed by the changing of our mind. So what I want you to see in this flour offering that we bring to God, it's not something apart from me. It is me. So when they brought flour, they brought some flour. And they brought some leaven, they brought some salt, they brought some frankincense, they brought, the stuff they brought. They literally did that, and they offered it to God, and that was a foreshadow of us. Jesus gave himself up. We're to be imitators, give ourselves up. And so the offering we bring to God is not just an external activity that we walk away from and leave behind, but it is our very life that we bring to him. So if you can think of the Old Testament people bringing their various sacrifices to God at different times, and you can imagine the joy and the excitement they had in coming to offer and worship God by bringing this offering, I think that's wonderful. And then we get to take it up a whole nother level because we're not just bringing something that we're going to put on the altar and leave, but we are that something. We are that fine flower. We are that soothing aroma. And thus we become imitators of God and imitators of Christ, and our life becomes that fragrant aroma. So we bring something far more valuable than literal flower. We bring the very being of our life, which is, I can't off the top of my head think of anything that's going to outdo that, that's going to trump that. I mean, when you bring your life, what else is there? I can't think of anything higher. Now, if you can, we'll have coffee and talk about it, but I can't. So then we had the grinding of the grain. Now, this isn't mentioned specifically, but when you said fine flour, okay, fine flour doesn't grow as fine flour, right? If you're going to have fine flour, somebody's going to have to do some work. And back then, before they had all the modern farm equipment, they had to do a lot of work, kind of work we don't even think about. So they had to prepare the ground. They had to go out to the field. I don't know how big of a field it took. I've never raised grain, but they had to have a little bit of acreage there. I know you don't raise the grain you want in a flower pot. So somebody had to get out there and they had to find the field, they had to buy the field or inherit the field. Then they had to have the equipment to plow the field and get the field ready. And then after they got the field ready, somebody had to get out there and sow the seed. Now there's a little more depth there because that seed had to come from somewhere, which was a previous harvest, which then we get into a repetitive chain of events. Then somebody had to kind of watch over it and protect it and keep an eye on the crop. And, for the life of me, I don't know what that would consist of. But then when it was all ready to come in, well, the crop didn't bring itself in, does it? So somebody had to go out there with a sickle and cut it. Somebody's got to gather it and put it in sheaves, so on and so forth. Then somebody's got to thresh it. And that wasn't easy either. That was intense manual labor that took some time. I mean, we read those stories about how they did it, and they'd catch a windy day and they'd throw it up in the air and the wind would carry the chaff off, and we go, oh, isn't that wonderful? No. Think about that. How many of you want to spend half a day, 6, 8 hours, dark to dark, throwing wheat up in the air, watching the wind blow up the chaff? I mean, it'd be really cool for about 5 minutes. But 10 hours later, I'm like, I don't think so. And now they got the grain. But it's grain. Somebody got to do something with it now. You got to grind it. Have you seen the pictures of the grinding bowls? Now, there were some bigger operations, but a lot of folks had a grinding bowl. And somebody had the chore of putting a little grain on a rock, more or less, and taking a bigger rock and rubbing it and rubbing it and rubbing it until you had the quality of flour that you wanted. So this is not an overnight process. This isn't something quick. This isn't simple. This is part of our modern problem. Part of our modern problem is I want to run through the Sonic. I want to get it quick. I want to hit my Taco Bell. Let me get in and get out. Okay, that's fine with Sonic and Taco Bell. But spiritually, the taking of our lives and grinding it into fine flour is a long process. I mean, I think sometimes we tend to go, well, I was baptized. I got it done. No, you got baptized. You got this thing started. That was the beginning point. Now comes all the discipline and the training. And so we do this. We grind it. Our life is processed. And this again imitates Christ. This is an area, I wish I knew how to elaborate this one more. One of these days I'll have to do a lesson here because we put Jesus in a category that I don't think we're totally correct with. He was a son, but he learned obedience from the things he suffered. And having been made perfect, he became to all those who obey him the source of eternal salvation. I think sometimes we put Jesus on this pedestal where he didn't have to do anything. He came into the world perfect and complete, spotless Son of God, and there was nothing for him to do but to endure the time until he got to the cross. Well, he learned obedience. Now, that's direct quote out of Hebrews 5, 8, and 9. He learned obedience from the things that he suffered, and he was made perfect. Now, you want to go back to the Greek on that probably. He was made complete. And now, he became the author of salvation to all those who obey him. And so we go through the process. Jesus was ground to become the bread of life. And we must also be ground by the things we suffer so that we can become fine flour, acceptable to offer to God, to be mixed with that salt and frankincense, and to be offered up a soothing aroma to God. And that's exactly what we want. That's Leviticus 2:9. You want it to be there in the presence of God where it's satisfying and pleasing to God. And the Old Testament imagery, it seems a little too casual to say it this way, but they're offering up their smoked offering, and it's almost like God's in heaven going, oh, yeah, that's it. Now, I know it's a little awkward to think of it that way, but it was a soothing aroma to God. And that is what we want our lives to be. Every day, not just Sunday, but remember what Paul said, whatever you do it as for the Lord. So again, I don't care what you're doing, you want to be about it. And now and then just pause and ask yourself, okay, is God in heaven going, oh, that's a good aroma. That one smells really good. Now, again, I know that's a little awkward, but let's work with that. That's the best we can. So our lives can be a soothing aroma to God. The question is, will we bring them as that soothing aroma without the leaven and the honey, which he didn't want? Will we bring him that unleavened lump that he wanted and be a sacrifice to God for a sweet smelling aroma? And it's totally doable. We absolutely can. So we'll walk in love and generosity and kindness and patience. That's going to be our salt, so to speak. I would tie that in with Galatians 5:22 and 23, where we have the fruits of the Spirit. And of course, that's love, joy, peace. You remember the fruits of the Spirit, right? If this was just a Bible class, I'd call somebody out and get you to quote the rest of them, but I'm not going to do that. So we're going to go to patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and temperance if you're an old King James person, or self-control if you're a more modern translation, and that's all good. So this is what we do. This is how we become that soothing aroma. So Leviticus 2 is our last slide. Ancient rules, they were there. And there was real stuff going on back then. I mean, these rules were followed, and they could be persnickety about them when they were on top of their game. But it wasn't just, oh, that's weird. They did what? It was a foreshadow. And Leviticus, as I said in the beginning, can be a boring book, and I'm not going to argue with that assessment. If you agree with me, I'm just going to say, but if I peel back the layers, and I can learn to sit with a passage a while, which is one of the challenges. I love our daily Bible reading. I'm going to continue to advocate it. And if you're not in our daily Bible reading yet, come on, jump on in. Don't worry about what's past. We'll just take it from today and move forward. But one of the challenges is not to get too caught up in checking the boxes. Oh, I did my reading. The challenge is to find a paragraph, find a statement, find a verse, find something that you can kind of hang on for the day and dig a little deeper into and meditate on instead of, just listening to nonsense all day long. And so the common flower of life can be offered to God. And at the risk of being repetitive, I'm going to do that again. Whatever you do it for the Lord. And if you're having trouble making that connection, and I'll agree some of the things are a little hard to make that connection, but if you're having trouble making that connection as you think about what you're going to do this week and how you're going to connect it to the Lord, and you need a little discussion on it, let's talk. Maybe you'll stump me. Maybe we'll come up with a good idea. But you're going to do it to the glory of God as that flower. Not a Sunday only kind of thing. It's that sincere heart, though. It's that attitude that I'm going to make this so beautiful, God smiles. Our challenge is to make our daily lives that grain offering that becomes a soothing aroma to God. That's the challenge of Leviticus 2 for you and I. Or, as the very last frame will say, how can you make your mundane activities, everything that's coming up this week, an offering that's pleasing to God? Now you can. My question is, how are you going to do it? And I'm not going to prescribe how you do it. I'm just going to challenge you. As you're doing whatever you do, just think, how can I do this in a way that God goes, yeah, that was good. That was a soothing aroma. Well, of course, it begins with following Jesus. And if you're not following Jesus, then obviously your life cannot be a soothing aroma. So if you're not yet in the straight and narrow path, we're here to help you any way we can. Father God, we stand and sing.